I'm Paul Johnson, and I'm here today with Paul Estabrooks and Jim Cunningham, co-authors of Standing Strong Through the Storm. During the seminar, we won't have an opportunity to have an intimate conversation with Paul and Jim, so we wanted to take the opportunity for them to share some of their stories concerning standing strong through the storm. Paul and Jim, good to be with you this afternoon. I was wondering if you could share with me the beginnings of standing strong through the storm.
It began back in around 1954-55 when Paul's father was the pastor of the church that my parents attended. So we met at church as young guys. In fact, we got a picture to show you, Paul, of what the two of us looked when he actually had hair up here, way up there. You know.
Even more hair than Jim.
Yeah, well, that's true.
In those days.
In those days, yeah. So that's where it began, and then friendship evolved as they moved to different pastorates, and we kind of kept in touch. And then he went to Bible school in London, and I came to Bible school, same Bible school. We were friends in Bible school. Then he was best man at my wedding to Rita back in '67.
And of course, I tell him that I'm still the best man.
Yeah, in fact, he tells Rita this, that he's still the best man. Some days she may even believe you, you know what I mean? So anyways, that's how it all began. And then he took off to the Philippines after Bible school. I went out to Vancouver and worked for Christian Service Brigade. And away we went in terms of keeping in touch while then he joined Open Doors. And the actual Open Doors connections began when he became the Asian director. And I was here in Canada, then he came back to Canada as the Canadian director. And one of his first things for me was say, how would you like to go down to Cuba back in 1988? Mm-hmm. So we began 88 contacts down in Cuba, then 89 into Tiananmen Square, and then 1990 into Russia, and that's been going overseas ever since. Mm-hmm. So that's where it began.
So how long have you actually been working on the project together, and could you give me a few of the stages that it's gone through?
SSTS began in, really, the roots were back in 1970s. In Open Doors Asia that I was a part of when I joined Open Doors 34 years ago, we had a program director named Dr. Everett Boyce. His doctorate was in education. He was concerned with training. He was a trainer in the earliest stages in Open Doors. We were concerned in that time that the countries of Asia, especially Southeast Asia, were not prepared for the potential of a communist takeover. There were strong communist movements in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, even in the Philippines where we were located. So they developed a seminar called More Than Conquerors. And it was prepared to prepare Christians for the challenges of communist regime taking over a country. Well, by the 1990s, when the Soviet Union had collapsed and communism, though still present in the world, was not considered to be the greatest threat, our Open Doors teams decided that, hey, we need another training program that prepares people for much more than just an ideological situation like communism. We have religious intolerance now all over the place. We have other challenges than these that Satan is using, other tactics that he's using against Christians. So we need a new program, a broader program, a more developed course. So we took the basis of More Than Conquerors, and the program team asked me to put it together. And so in 1999, I began writing Standing Strong Through the Storm, and we finished that very first draft in about the year 2000. So that's kind of how it began. And then we tested it, we field tested it in several locations, Sri Lanka, Northeast India, Thailand, and some other places in Asia as a beginning. And of course, from there, after 9/11 occurred, our opportunities for sharing the seminar expanded significantly.
Probably we should throw in there too that's when you and I, when we met on this project, Paul said, okay, it's finished, what do you think of it? And I said, well, you need a study guide, you need a teacher's guide to teach the thing. He says, well, you're the adult educator, you go write that. And so I spent some time in 2001, in the summer of 2001, writing all this material, sent it to Paul. He goes to a conference in Malaysia, 9/11 happens, September. He's in Malaysia in October, and I get a phone call from Malaysia from the Asian director saying, yeah, like, Paul would like you to come with me to Ambon, Indonesia, and field test this material. So that's where we did our first field test together, 2001 November in Ambon, with about 50 pastors who had not fled the island, who were still there after all that problem in Ambon. And then that's now kind of gone from 2001, then we've been asked to go overseas in different Central Asia places, Southeast Asia. Now we're teaching in Canada. Going back to the beginning of the SSTS ministry for myself, I remember going out the first time with Paul to do it in a seminar, and I had 2 people in my church approach me, and they asked the same question, and the question they asked me was, by what authority are you going out of here from Canada to go over to Indonesia or any other country and tell them about persecution? You don't know anything about it. I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, you've never been persecuted. You've never been in prison. You've never been attacked. You know, your wife hasn't been killed. How can you go out there and minister? You've never experienced persecution. And that's the phrase they used. You've never experienced persecution. Well, the reality was they forced me to look at the scriptures, and I find Jesus said to his disciples, blessed are you when men hate you and exclude you and insult you and reject you and say all manner of evil against you for my name's sake. He said, he's suggesting to the disciples, you are going to be persecuted in the future. You haven't experienced it yet, but get ready for it because it's going to come. So what I realized was when I went out there the first time, I wasn't going out to teach my experience. If somebody's been martyred, they can't talk about martyrdom. If someone's in prison, they can't go teach. But if I can go and share with them the principles of Scripture, then those principles of Scriptures are what speak to the heart, not my experience. I'm not going out there to give my experience in persecution. Alan Yuan was in jail for 21 years and 8 months. I've never been in jail. But I can share Alan's story with someone who's out there. So what it convicted me of was the authority of Scripture. The Scriptures are the authority to understand persecution. So the more I read the Scriptures now, like Glenn Penner's book on a theology of persecution, goes from Genesis right through to Revelation and says, hey, the whole of Scripture has stories of persecution in it, and you need to be aware of them. So I start reading them, and it makes me aware that I'm struck with the authority of Scripture. I'm struck with the thread of persecution that runs right through the Scriptures, right to the end, by the word of their testimony and their own blood in Revelation. The martyrs at the end goes right from beginning to end, so to speak. So I look at that and I say that for myself personally, and the other is to learn how to forgive. That is the key principle for me on this whole thing, because whether it's forgiving the guy who cuts me off in the highway, or whether it's forgiving the family member or whatever for whatever's been done, forgiveness is one of the key principles that has come out of this from all these regions that we go to. Authority of Scripture, forgiveness.
SSTS has impacted me in my own life significantly, and I realized it when the U.S. office asked me to begin writing a daily devotional from the SSTS material and the stories from the field and the Scriptures, those 3 ways. And as I began to write, I was convinced I could never do 365 days. But they said, well, just start and we'll use whatever you can do. I began putting together a scripture, a principle, and a story from the field for each day of the year. And in time, little by little, doing it piece by piece, I was actually able to complete a book that's now out called Daily Inspiration from the Lion's Den. And the aspect that has affected me most of all is the whole aspect of dealing with fear, because you realize how much we fear different things, the future, the unknown, and even dying in many people's cases, or in most people's cases. and how much Jesus teaches about not being afraid, and how much the whole Bible teaches about that. And so for my own personal life, I think SSTS has helped me most of all with that attitude. And that's why I'm not afraid at all to go anywhere I'm asked to teach SSTS. It's the most dangerous place in the world. I mean, Brother Andrew, our founder, is a great teacher of this. And he says, there's only really one safe place in the whole world. And it's not Canada, it's the center of God's will. He says, if you're in the center of God's will, that's the only safe place to be. And you don't have to worry about other places that you go or whatever. He also says, by the way, something that I think is rather hilarious. And he says, you know, people are so worried about going places where they're going to die. He says, the majority of people die in their bed. That's the most dangerous place in the world, is in your bed, because that's where the majority of people die. So, but that's one of the areas that I think has encouraged me most in my personal life, is the fact I do not have to be afraid. And when you're not afraid, then you are able to be courageous. I mean, you're able to be outgoing in your witnessing, in every aspect of your life, because you aren't afraid. It's a great truth that SSTS has impacted me with in my own personal life. Yes, the stages of SSTS have been significant, because I told you how it began, but during this decade since 2001, as we've shared the seminar, it has developed in many countries, and now, of course, it's in 32 different, the actual publication is in 32 different languages. It's been translated into even more languages than that, but not published as a book. And so that was a life of its own, all of these translations and publications in different languages. But then we received requests for a more academic level. See, SSTS was designed for lay people. The people we first have shared this with and who receive it most gladly are young Christians, either young in their faith. Usually these are believers who have not been believers for a long time and don't really understand the scriptures that well, or they are believers who we would call nominal. In other words, they don't know their Bibles well, as in Ambon, Indonesia, which we'll share about later. So the SSTS is a basic course for lay people. Now, seminaries are saying we need an academic course for pastors and those who are more academically inclined, who want to study this in more depth than just a cursory understanding of the issues. And so Jim and I have prepared a theology of persecution and discipleship course. The acronym is TOPAD, which is an offshoot of SSTS. And we have taught it together in seminaries. In fact, this summer we're going to Malaysia to teach it in Malaysia. And there's an online, and in Sri Lanka, yes, there's an online seminary that wants to use this course online. So it's developed, it's another stage. And just yesterday, we got an email from one of our co-workers who has been teaching SSTS himself all over Southeast Asia. And he says, everyone is asking for a children's version of SSTS. We want a children's version. And of course, that's very much related to a project that Jim had worked on earlier too, when people asked for an oral one. How can we teach SSTS to people who don't read, who are illiterate? And so what we would have called a visual SSTS was another stage. So there are multiple stages, and it continues on.
Having got this far, have the purposes and the reasons for standing strong through the storm changed in your viewing?
One of the things that was most interesting as we developed this, and our first teachings of it, of course, were all overseas and on the field, in field situations of Open Doors. People began to read the book. In fact, the book was published, Jim, right in 2004, right?
The one in Canada?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the original curriculum was developed in the year 2000. But in 2004, we produced a book on request for Western countries, if you will, because everybody kept asking, what is this SSTS thing that you're teaching?
Yeah.
What is this material? What is it all about? And when we explained, they said, well, hey, Western countries need this message as much as the third world or countries in other continents. So we began to put together the same material, but with a focus on what were the tactics Satan uses against us in, let's say, the Western world, vis-a-vis other parts of the world.
Tell them Brother Andrew's quote, but it'll never come here.
Yes. Of course, Brother Andrew always said that as he traveled the world, he would come to a country and talk about persecution, and they would say, oh, that will never happen here. In fact, that happened in Ambon. And when Andrew would come back the second time, they would say, oh, we thought it would never happen here, but it already had.
Yeah.
And Ambon is the same, Jim.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but in the late 1990s, Open Doors went to Ambon to say, we've got this seminar. This was just previous to the official curriculum of SSTS, but they went there and said to the pastors in Ambon, before the fighting and problems began, they said, we have this seminar. And the pastor said, we don't need that seminar. That kind of stuff only goes on in Jakarta, the capital of the country. It only happens there. It will never happen here. And only within a year, there was fighting and conflict and people killed. And so that whole issue made us realize that persecution can impact any country, no matter how educated or how sophisticated they may be. And so that was how then SSTS became developed for the Western world. And then Jim and I wrote a booklet called Red Skies at Dawn, which was to alert literally North Americans, was who we were aiming that one at, to the fact that, hey, the challenges in our country are growing against Christians. And as we've studied other people, like academic like John Loeffler, who has studied what happened in Germany at the time of World War II, where Hitler took steps. He was elected. I mean, he was elected by the people. And then he began to make moves to the point where then finally he could just say, we're going to eliminate these Jewish people, because he had already made progressive steps to make laws so that when he wanted to, he just eliminated them.
7 years.
And that kind of process can happen in any country, even the most democratic country. And so we wrote Red Skies at Dawn in order to prepare people here for that potential. We're not saying it's going to happen or when it's going to happen for sure. The potential is always there.
Yeah.
After this long of time, how many places have you been able to share the good news that comes from the lessons out of Standing Strong?
So we've done a number of places together, the two of us, where we've taught, and then we've done other courses where we've done it individually. Like I've been individually to Sri Lanka to teach in seminaries there. Paul's taught it in other places, but as far as number of countries, it's in 32 languages, and we've been in pretty well close to the majority of those languages and teaching it. Sometimes they're combined. One time in Kazakhstan, where we had 7 countries, I think, together from 7 different countries were together, but many of them have that in their mother tongue language. So, yeah, but I gotta say, probably the highlight one for both of us was the beginning one in Ambon, Indonesia. And that was probably the one, because that was when the war was going on, there was people being killed, and we got this invitation just 2 months after 9/11 to go there on November 2001. And both our wives sort of kind of went, whoa, like, you're going where? You're getting on an airplane to go to Indonesia? And people are dying there. And we got there in November, just before Ramadan. We had about 50 pastors for a few days before Monday through. And the night we arrived, a motorcycle blew up in front of the hotel. He was trying to get his bomb into the church, but it blew up on the motorcycle and killed him, the 2 riders. And so here we are arriving in a war zone, basically. And each day we woke up in the hotel, we could hear gunshots. There was We went to 2 funerals of people who had, in that culture, they bury the next day sort of thing. So we saw the bodies the day they died. It was just an amazingly impressionable thing. But the key in that whole thing was, after all these thousands of people had died and thousands of people had fled the island, and 14,000 houses burned to the ground, churches burned to the ground, mosques burned to the ground, Christians fighting Muslims. It was just unbelievable. And when we were there, we taught the course. The key thing we taught on that one was on forgiveness. And we talked about the SSTS material that we had on forgiveness, and how that Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." And one of the pastors, in front of all the 50 pastors, made the confession publicly. He said, "When they murdered my wife, I did not forgive them because they knew what they were doing. And when they burned my house, I didn't forgive them because they knew what they were doing. And when they burned my church, I didn't forgive them." He said, "I thought if they knew what they were doing, I didn't have to forgive them. Because Jesus said, 'Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing.'" And we kind of went, whoa, that's an interesting twist of theology. But he said publicly, "You need to know that as of today, I am forgiving." After 2 years, this all happened 2 years previous, he said, "I'm forgiving the Muslims." Well, out of that 50 people, they had a day of prayer. They got the 2 white boys off the island because it was the beginning of Ramadan. They said, "We don't know what's going to happen." So they got us home on the Friday morning of Ramadan, and they started a day of prayer, went back to their churches. They had 3 days of prayer and fasting in their churches. And at the end of the 3rd day, they said the people came out of their houses, filled the streets, and started singing hymns and everything and praising God. Went to the churches, and they said, "Okay, we now have a group of 5 of the 50 pastors." They formed the committee of the 5. I don't know what they called the committee, but they went to the Muslim leaders and offered a peace apology for the fighting and the killing that the Christians had done against the Muslims. Mm-hmm. And on that 3rd day, 4th day, the Muslims accepted the peace apology, and there's been peace on the island virtually for the last 12, well, since 2001.
And you were back later, right?
And I went back, I was back with Rita and the Indonesian director about 2010, about 10 years later, and went to the hotel where we taught the seminar. The owner of the hotel was a Christian, and he, on the 5th floor, had a room, about fair-sized room, like when we're in here now, and he said, "That's your prayer room. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Come to the front desk, ask for the key, and anybody can go up there and pray." And they've been praying nonstop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, since 2001. They pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They pray for the peace of Indonesia. They pray for the peace of Ambon. They pray for missions and peace countries in Korea. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
So essentially, to answer your question, Paul, we've been in every.
Are you saying that I didn't answer his question?
We've been in every continent that Open Doors works, and many individuals.
Yeah,
you also went to Colombia by your
Yeah,
time,
I went to
right?
Colombia. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So it's been a real joy to be in different cultures, different language situations, and different parts of the world to share this message.
I was wondering, having traveled to many locations to share Standing Strong Through the Storm, if you could share some of the life lessons that you've learned outside of the material you're presenting.
Whoa, stories.
No, this is the part where it could take all afternoon, all evening, all day tomorrow.
You got to tell
Yeah,
us.
okay. Jim and I were doing seminars in Central Asia, probably not wise to mention the country initially, and our director there said, "Could you go to the country to the south, which is Tajikistan, and do a seminar there as well?" And we said, "Well, okay, it'll take 3 extra days on our schedule," but there were to be 40 people there that were really anxious to have this experience, and so we agreed. We arrived there after a very interesting journey.
Yes, that was the Yellow Submarine.
We had a Russian guy pick us up, a Russian-speaking person pick us up at the border and drive us across almost desert-like conditions, and he was very proud of the fact. "I have English cassette," he says, "English cassette," a cassette which he pops into his car cassette player. So you know how old his car was. It had a cassette player. And and it was the Beatles. It was all songs of the Beatles.
We
And
all
so-
live in a yellow submarine.
So we're going,
a yellow
we're going
submarine,
across the
a
desert,
yellow
singing
submarine.
these Beatles songs at the
We
top of our
all-
voice.
For 90 minutes.
We arrive in the capital, and the leader of the group said, "We have big problem. We no find interpreter for you in our language, but we find lady who can speak Russian and English, and so we hire her. Her name is Larissa." So Jim and I meet Larissa. There were just a few problems with Larissa. Number one, she was not a Christian. Number two, she had never read the Bible. And number three, her English was horrible. I mean, it was
Niet
pathetic.
problemski, you know?
It was terrible. And she did not understand even the word forgiveness, grace, any of these kind of terminologies that we Christians use, every other word almost. And we had a really difficult time. I mean, it was tough. 3 days. The only saving grace for the group that were there was that they didn't know each other before. These were believers from all over the country who came and had fellowship together for the first time. And they did all their worship, literally their music worship in the morning in Tajik, their language. They did devotions in Tajik. Of course, when they had meals, they all had good fellowship. So there was a benefit for them. But I don't think they learned anything at this seminar, because we spent all our time trying to get through the translator what we wanted to share. And I remember, to my shame, going home on the plane and telling Jim, I don't think that last seminar was worth our time. We should have just gone home. Years go by, 6 years to be exact, and we go back to the area, to another country where they're bringing all of the future trainers of SSTS together to have a training seminar. In fact, it was really significant, because they even had Uyghur people from Western China there, as well as all through Central Asia. And on the second day, a young boy comes up to us, and he says, "I'm from the Tajik group, from Tajikistan." He said, "You don't know me, but you know my mother." I said, "We do?" He said, "Yes, my mother's name is Larissa." And I remember rolling my eyes thinking, oh man, who could ever forget Larissa? And then he said, after the seminar, my mother got a hold of a Bible. She read the Bible all the way through, and she led all of her family to faith in Jesus. And he says, now I, her son, am here to learn how to teach this course in the Tajik language when I go back to my home country. I just thought, oh,
Yeah,
Lord, God is good all the time. This is good as we tell the story. Even when we think time is a waste of time, we later find out that it was really we were there for, not the 40 people that we were thinking we were supposed to teach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the battles I have in North America is dealing with materialism and how to live in an affluent society like we do here in North America, in my area. And when I go overseas, I see people that love Jesus Christ, love the church, are bold in their evangelism, and extreme levels of poverty, and less than I have in North America. And the contentment that I see and the joy that I see is contagious when you're with them. I mean, it's just a sense of these people, whether we've been in South Sudan with believers there, that the country has no electricity, no asphalt roads, no PowerPoints, none of the typical North American affluence, and yet they just abundantly love Jesus Christ and are full of joy. So when I look at that, it just keeps refreshing me anytime I go, whether it's with Paul or with Rita, my wife. You know my wife, Paul, so I can't say that, but you know her. And when we go, we come back with great joy and a sense of, aren't we blessed? We are really, really blessed here in North America to have freedom, to have liberty, to have opportunity, to have communication skills with people that we can share our faith. What we lack in this country, for me, is boldness to actually do it.
Very true. I think in my case, studying the curriculum for first SSTS, then our theology of persecution and discipleship course, has taken me on a journey, even academically, that I don't think I ever would have done before, and that is primarily in the area of nonviolence. Now, the Christian community historically has been divided on war, on the issue of fighting and war. You have one group who are basically pacifists, and you have another group who believe in what is called just war that Augustine developed back in his time. And these are the dominantly two views of war and fighting that exist. So there is no unified view of war or fighting or responding to war in Christian communities. So you have to decide which you're going to. I was brought up in a community that believed
Post-war.
in just war.
Yeah, just after the Second World War.
Yeah, and just war, it was the philosophy that my father, who was a pastor, accepted, and the Bible school that Jim and I went to would have probably taught that if you asked them about what issue. So in working with areas where Christians are being attacked, how do they decide how to respond to these attacks? I've been studying where Christians have been involved in nonviolence. I'm not meaning pacifism. I'm not meaning that you do nothing in a passive way, but active, what they call active love or aggressive love. And I think of even issues like in Palestinian Israel, where Christians will demonstrate, but they will never throw a stone, for example, which the kids do there, or they will never do any kind of violent act. But as Christians who feel they're being that there's injustice in their experience, they do it in a nonviolent way. And so the whole nonviolent movement, which of course was popularized really by Mahatma Gandhi, and then in North America became very, very well known through Martin Luther King Jr. That whole aspect of the Christian view of nonviolence, which I feel parallels Jesus' teachings very closely, has been something that has blessed me in studying it in my own life.
Now, having traveled, and we know that always gives opportunities for fellowship and growth. But I'd sure love to hear from you about some of the funny things that have happened to you as a result of having to share Standing Strong Through the Storm.
All right, I got to tell this one.
All right, you go first.
Paul and I are going to be going to northern Iraq, to Erbil up in Kurdistan. And then, so the night before we go, Rita prepares a nice dinner, and we sit down, and she says, "Hey, I got this film called The Illusionist. I'd like us to, let's watch it." She said, "I heard it's a good movie," and it is. Great movie. I'd recommend it. So we watched this movie about an illusionist who makes things disappear. Fine, I get on the plane, fly to Istanbul, meet Paul, we check into the hotel, and the next morning is Sunday, so we're going to go to church. So we said we get in the yellow cab, and we know where the church is on the map, and it should be this direction. And now we see on the map that he's sort of driving the long way. So I look at Paul and say, "I think we're getting the scenic route. What should have cost a few dollars is now costing many dollars." So we get to the end of the car ride, and the driver says to him the price. It was 39 lira, whatever. And Paul says, "Well, I have a 50 lira. And he says, "Well, you give it to me and I'll give you change." So Paul hands him his 50 lira bill. And he, at that moment, turns around and says, "Oh, do you see where you're going over here?" And he points to where the church is. And while he points to the church, he goes, "Oh," and then he says, "No, do you have any American money? I don't have enough change here." So I said to Paul, "Yeah, I'm the big hero this year." I said to Paul, "Yeah, I got a $100 bill." I said, "I'll get it changed into lira." So fine. So I hand this guy my $100 bill. And he then turns around and says, now, do you see where you're going? Your church is right down that alley. And now we turn around, we both look out the window again. And he then says, oh, wait a second, I got a better idea. He says, here's your 100 back. And he said, here's your change. He says, give me, if you got $40 American, and we had 40 American, so we gave it to him or whatever, and he gives back the change. And he says, here's your 50 lira back, and here's your 100 back. He says, I'll do it that way. That's easier. And he's just chacking away, talking about this. So we go to church. Nice church service. We decide to walk home. We walk home. We go into the drugstore to buy some toothpaste. Paul hands the 50 lira note to the attendant, and he gets back 1 lira change for no, he got back 1 lira because it was 4 lira. Mm-hmm. And he says, where's the rest of my change? He says, sir, you only gave me a 5 lira. And we both looked at each other and said, 5? We just gave you a 50. He says, look, I opened my kill. He said, there's no 50 in here. There's only a 5. And he shows us his till. We both look at each other and say, that turkey taxi driver kept the 50 lira and switched it and gave back a 5. Yeah. So we thought, oh, we got taken by this taxi driver. So we go back to the hotel. We have 2 separate rooms in the hotel. We lie down, we have a nap, and I wake up and I'm feeling so compassionate for my brother who's lost all this money, you know. So I go knocking on his door and I says, hey, I said, I feel really bad. I said, I still got my $100 bill. I said, why don't we split the loss here? And I said, I owe you some money anyway. So I reach into my pocket and I pull out and I says, here, Pablo, here, take the 100, okay? And he takes it, he opens up the 100. It's a $1 bill.
These worldwide travelers,
these seasoned veteran travelers who have been all over the world in how many countries. We both got taken by the same taxi driver on the same day in the same cab.
Yeah.
So we thought, okay. Then the funny part for me is we get on the plane, we fly to Erbil in Kurdistan, where we're going to be teaching a seminar with the Kurdish people in that area with SSTS. We get off the plane, they drive us to this nice new hotel that had been built. We go through and there's a Fox News channel on front and it's playing a movie. And guess what the movie was? The Illusionist. So the Dutch brother who's with us, he looks at it and says, now that's a training film for Turkish taxi drivers.
How do you envision you seeing the future take Standing Strong Through the Storm and continue its impact into the next decade?
Well, I think the biggest thing for us for the next decade is to see a development of new teachers and a younger generation that are getting involved. Obviously, Jim and I are not going to be able to do this forever, although we would like to think we could. I mean, we still feel energetic and young enough to keep doing it.
Caleb and Joshua.
Yeah, but it's obviously our time is going to lapse when we won't be able to do it anymore. And so our vision for the next decade is to see a host of new young trainers developed who will be involved in teaching all of these materials. And it's beginning. I mean, as we did the seminary course last May, we had 2 of the Open Doors people, a young lady from the UK and a young man from South Africa come and sit in on the course. And just the other day we got an email that this young man from South Africa was invited to Australia, and in Australia he had a meeting with the seminaries and Bible colleges of Australia to encourage them to include the study of persecution in their curriculum of their school, and apparently it was a very successful time. And that's our dream. Our dream is that seminaries and schools will see the need of this course and even develop their own teachers, frankly, who will take the curriculum and the material and to see it continue on.
Why should I attend a SSTS seminar?
It's a great question, Paul, because when you think about where we are at, when you're in a country where there is no persecution, as we say, where it's mild, to use my bud's, he likes this
mild
chili
curry.
one about hot curry, mild chili, mild, medium, and whatever. Well, it's mild in Canada at the moment. But like we said in Red Skies at Dawn, we see the future changing. It's changing by the day. It's just, I mean, you just don't recognize it on daily increments until you step back and see what changes there's been, say, in 10 years. 10 years from now, who knows where this country and other countries that are currently free might be. I just looked at a report recently that showed, like, for example, we're all Canadians, so let's talk about Canada for a few seconds here. The number of, there's been 4 censuses taken in this country, like back in, they took one in 2011 and they took one in 2001. Every 10 years they take a census. And the Canadian census showed that 40 years ago, the percentage of Christians, people who identified themselves in the census as Christians, was up around 80%. Well, now, 40 years later, it's at 67%. And the number of people who 40 years ago said they had no religion was just a little tiny sliver up there of a few percentage points. Now it's about 20-some percent, 28% or something of the people say, I have no religion. They're not Muslim, they're not Hindu, they're not Buddhist, they're not Sikh or Jewish or Christian. They have no religion. And they're basically your secular humanists. Well, the more secular humanists that are into the media, you can guarantee then the less sympathetic the media will be for Christian values, Christian perspectives, Christians, even the right of Christians to have certain jobs. Why would we want a Christian in that job? And it'll narrow down in terms of the acceptance. Whereas 40 years ago, when we were kids, there was a broad base acceptance of basic common Christian values. And well, you know this from your experience living in this country too, that it's the same. It's the same. We've had freedom as Canadians and as Christians. But we see that as we look ahead, we see that changing. So why should you attend? Why not you, but why should anybody attend, Paul? It's because they need to be prepared for this. Because if I could just sort of say one thing Paul and I have learned that it probably answers your question. The opposition is not to you as a Christian, Paul. The opposition is to Jesus Christ in you. They know you're a Christian and they don't accept Jesus Christ. So it's really Jesus Christ that is the opposite. So all this secular, whatever, antagonism is not, you're okay as a person. I mean, you're a nice guy. We like you, right? He's a good guy.
That's right.
For sure. We're nice guys. We really like being alive in this country. But they don't like Jesus in us. They see that as we're a threat because we believe that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father but by me. That's the most controversial verse in the Bible for secular humanists to deal with. Because if you believe that, then there's no other way. And that's the challenge. People who believe that need to then take the course to understand how do you prepare for it and how do you know how to respond positively and biblically.
If you had opportunity to do it again, knowing what you know today, would you still put this much effort into standing strong through the storm?
Yes, well, let me answer that one. I would say that yes, the answer is yes, I would do it again, and I would probably double the effort because of not knowing when we started just how significant the impact of this course was going to be and how many people it would impact, and the blessing that it has been to a number of people. So if I were doing it again, yes, I would double the effort.
Amen.
I'm curious to hear, you've traveled around the world, you've seen many people, different cultures and processes. Help me to understand how your wives have invested into standing strong through the storm.
Yeah. Your wife, Paul, as you know, from the experience, it took 1 million Bibles into China in one night. But for that one night, there was an investment of 6 months of preparation and time away from Diane and the family. That's a time investment, and it has a major impact that the wife, like in this case Diane, and even in Rita's case, when we now don't do like 6-month training programs, but we do go away for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and sometimes that puts its own set of pressures on Diane and Rita, and I mean, my observation, we've just been together as with our wives as two couples here recently, and my observation is that they are both very supportive of what we do. Like, if we say we're going to somewhere, they also, the other significant thing I think is they trust open doors. And here's the reason why I say that. If I say to Rita, I'm going to go to Kurdistan, she goes, okay. I guess open doors must feel it's safe for you to go in there. I mean, like, she doesn't feel like that we're suddenly going to get asked to go someplace where we're just being, it's not a suicidal mission sort of thing. She trusts that, because she's learned that I've also been canceled on trips. I've also been stopped from going. I've had change of plans. No, you're not going there. Sorry, And so there is a sensitivity by open doors to try and keep us alive. But Brother Andrew, his favorite phrase is, "We can get you in. We can't always guarantee we get you out."
So far, we've made it out.
So far, we've made it. But I think you should tell them about Algeria, and that one thing about being a tourist.
Yes. Okay.
That's the one, because we almost didn't get out of there.
That's right. Our wives have been very supportive, though, and I think that's crucial for anyone in ministry. The wife is a part of the ministry as well. I mean, it's like when I was dating this girl, my father said, "Now, son, remember, when you marry this young lady, you are not just marrying her, you're marrying her family. Whether you think you are or not, you are." And it's when you take on a ministry, the family become involved directly or indirectly in that ministry. And so it's important that they have that same commitment and same calling and vision. We were traveling in Algeria at one point, and it was taken out to a very kind of secret place where believers were meeting. And we were in a car with a believer, and we were in the back seat, and he would say, "Get down, we're coming up to a checkpoint." And we come up to this checkpoint, and all these guys are there with big AK-47s and whatever. And we said to this driver, who spoke limited English, "What are these? No, he spoke limited English. He was primarily a French speaker. And what are these people looking for with these big guns?" And he said, "They're looking for tourists." We said, "Well, we're tourists." He goes, "Yeah, they're looking for tourists," and we kept going like, "Oh man, we better duck. They're looking for us." And then finally, another brother in the car said, "What he means is they're looking for terrorists," and his pronunciation of terrorist was tourist. Then we felt a lot better. But we did have to leave. We had to leave a day early in that situation because we were spotted there, and it was making pressure on the church. So we had to leave one day early from that seminar.
So our wives appreciate that, that the attempt is to keep us, bring us home. That's what it is. But they also, I think it's a great question, because wives are definitely part of it. And we've been blessed with two good wives for we're coming up close to 50 years, you see. So,
When you see Rita and Diane next, on behalf of Open Doors and the team worldwide, will you please let them know how much we appreciate their investment, their willingness to stay and pray, their willingness to make it possible for you to impact the world with the power of God's Word and to enhance the kingdom through the ministry that you guys have carried on. We deeply appreciate the both of you, but let them know we appreciate them as well. I understand that you gentlemen have an announcement to make about Standing Strong Through the Storm. Could you share that with us?
Yes, we have an announcement, and it's developed over the last 12 years. And that is, as we have been teaching SSTS, as we have been getting feedback from those that take the course, we have learned that there are some additional things that people would like to know and to have. And so we have been incorporating this in, and we will now be, God willing, shortly producing the second edition of SSTS. The first edition was officially published in 2004. And God willing, this year, which is 2013 as we record this, we'll be publishing a second edition of Standing Strong Through the Storm. A lot more material added to it.
In regards to that second edition, I'm wondering if it will be released in just a single style format.
Well, initially, the book is going to be the first one published as an e-book. It's going to be an electronic book. So people who would like to get it will be able to get it very soon, electronically, that is. I'm assuming it will also be on Amazon.com, where you can download the book and have it on your iPad or any of those types of instruments. So that's the first change, because none of what we've done thus far has been electronically available. And then, of course, we expect that it will be published as an actual physical book for those who still like the paper book. And also probably to be translated into a number of languages as well.
If we've taken Standing Strong Through the Storm seminar, is there some other materials that would be available for us?
Good question, because we've been talking about this in terms of what extra things do we really want to see. First of all, with the text and with the ebook and everything, we would like to see some online access. We're thinking of a website through Open Doors where they would be able to go on the website, perhaps get a password or something, log in, and be able to view some of the videos that Open Doors has produced. And we want to get those videos online. We want to put not the stories, the PowerPoint, so that when people go to teach, we've also thought of doing like a 6-hour, one-day seminar on video, so that when that is ready, it could be available to churches to go and do a one-day seminar in a local church, or do it as a 6-week Bible study, or there's all kinds of options out there that people could add on, hopefully, by God's grace, to be able to learn more about it.
And in terms of content, we are constantly adding things because of requests from our coworkers and situations around the world. For example, one group said, "We need, you are talking about a course that you are preparing people intellectually, practically, and spiritually. But the practical element is most of what people are asking us about. So, what do I do if I'm imprisoned, if I'm arrested and taken to prison? What are the things I need to know about preparing for prison or preparing for interrogation, and how do I keep from telling them my friend's information?" And some of the very, very practical things are things that we've been asked to begin to consider to add to the curriculum of SSTS.
The second thing that we've been asked to add is persecution talks about like SSTS talks about how to prepare for persecution, but like what about trauma after, like if they've already gone through it? So there's a connection now with some things on trauma healing, and then back to the shame and honor culture too. Like we've realized we're dealing with people from different cultures, of guilt cultures, shame cultures, fear cultures, and they have different responses to persecutions.
And Jim and his wife have already been on 2 major trauma healing sessions in southern Sudan, and have had the training and experience in that area. So we will be including some aspects of dealing with trauma healing for people who have really been through some of the really tough times as well.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Paul, for sharing with us stories, experiences, your calling, your heartbeat, and future of Standing Strong Through the Storm. I trust that this time of sharing and stories have been a tremendous blessing to you.